Maybe 18.
Right.
And so we went, Mary Grace, Lou Ray and I, Mary Grace, a cousin, went with Dad out to check these cattle. And this was when the road wasn't oiled, and that's when the dips were like
Oh, yeah.
up and down like this. And so Dad would drive really fast. Well, on the trip out there, Dad picked up a bum, put him in the back of the pickup, and we knew this guy's going to kill us. You know how kids are, imaginations. Yeah. Anyway, he dumped him off. This was before the freeway. So he dumped him off where we turned to go up to the ranch. And it was such fun going up and down and going fast. And when we got out to the ranch, at that time, Aunt Flora lived in the old house, and there was one or two, it seemed like there were two, little like shed cabins right out where the ponds were out there. And we stayed in one of those, us girls, and we slept in it that night. We stayed overnight. But that night when we got out there, I remember a little of visiting with Aunt Flora. And I don't know, I knew that Alan and them were together at that time. Anyway, when that night we went over to the next ranch, I don't know who owned it at that time, and I remember walking over the springs that were just running loose, but they belonged to the other guy. Do you know who owned the ranch next, way back then?
I don't. It was Alan Nays, and he had a business relationship. But it must not have been a very happy part in a business relationship, because Alan Nay sold 11 acres, 7 acres here, 3 acres here, and the wash goes between them.
Well, we walked over from Flora's, Aunt Flora's,
right,
over to the house, and we walked over, and this guy smoked. And we'd never been around anybody that smoked, this little. Right. And we would go, and we about got lickings over it.
Yeah.
Because Dad was very religious and very strong, but he was never a person to
look down on.
To look down on a person that doesn't believe and act like he does. To him, all people were equal. That's just how Dad was.
Right.
And so it was quite an experience, this trip out there. And then the next day, I don't even remember where we ate. Aunt Flora didn't feed us, I'll tell you for sure. Anyway, Dad wanted to check all the water holes where Aunt Flora, where the cattle were. And so we walked from water hole to water hole to water hole to water hole. And on the way, I collected a lot of fool's gold. There's a lot of fool's gold out there.
Yeah.
And so when we got back to the road, I put the food, because I was dragging behind, and I put the food. Dad was always saying, hurry up, Anna, but I was packing all the food skulls. So then when we got to the road, we had to walk back up to the pickup. And I could pick up my food skull on the way out. But that was the first and only trip I remember as a teenager. That was it.
And how old are you?
I would say I was either 12 or 13.
And then what sisters went with you?
No, just Ray
Just you and Ray.
and Mary Grace, my cousin, Mary Grace, on my mother's side. And so the three of us. And in that old house, in that shed thing where the bed we stayed, they had this old phonograph, one of these that you crank. Mm-hmm. So we had fun playing these records on this old crank thing. And it looked brand new at that time, but they threw it out there in the weather, and it didn't survive.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was my only experience as a teenager, was then. And then Dad didn't ever talk to us lower kids. I think he talked to the upper kids more than he talked to us lower kids, because he didn't feel so good, dragging that leg around. But my next trip is one where Julia and Wilma, Beth was there. I showed you the picture. And we just went out for the day and cooked in the pockets in that. And I had little kids then, so you were probably there, probably. I don't know if you were, maybe.
Because Randy's a year or two older than me.
But Randy was there. Well, I'm not even sure
Sean's a year old. I mean, not Sean.
Terry.
Terry's a year older than me.
Is he? Because I know Terry is Terry's about 64.
Yeah, and I'm 63.
Yeah, and Randy's 66.
Yeah.
Anyway, I know I had a couple of kids, and I was looking at the pictures, and I'd got those pictures from Ray. And there's more of those because Rex took those pictures. And Wilma was there, and I know Beth was there, and I know Venice was there. And I just remember we went out and cooked, but we did not go up to the ranch. And that's actually until we started going on these expeditions when you guys started.
Right.
And when we went up to the cave, and I remember
caves.
when you kids were little, you went out and you brought back that big animal and thought you had what was it? It looked like a big turtle, but they thought it was something else. And Orland told us it was a dangerous animal, but I don't think it was. I don't even know what it was.
Oh.
But and then I think that was my trip, and then we camped there a few times at the cave, and then we switched over. But other than that, I don't have.
So how long ago after that initial trip where you just went for the day did you start going to camp? How many, or was it?
Actually, when my kids were little, maybe Randy, when we had the camper,
Yeah.
we went quite a bit then.
Yeah.
When we had the camper, and we had that dog Sandy,
Oh, yeah.
and he was limping around, and Ken said, "They don't make the dogs like that, they don't make dogs like they used to."
Yeah.
When Ken said, and I remember we climbed a lot up to the dam.
Yeah.
And I remember your mom got stuck going up.
Oh.
So what started the rolling the tires and all of those activities?
I don't know. My kids
That-
used to drag them up with Mark and them. They'd drag those stupid things up there, and I know they did it, but my kids were doing it with Julia's
Oh, it
kids.
was our fault.
Well, my kids were too little to think, because Mark and Glenn were...
Well, Glenn,
older.
Ray and Glenn started it.
There was that?
Yeah. And then we, and then we kind of picked it up.
Yeah, I just know we had a when we were camped there, and Wilma, I don't know if Wilma was sick at that point, but I kind of felt she might be. We had a testimony meeting at sunset up on that rock above the cave. That was so wonderful. I remember that. It was one of the highlights of the ranch for me was, and I was married at that time, and that's when we had the camper. I think Wendy and Dana, do you remember you went in the camper with us down there that one time?
I don't remember. I know we went down. I have some memories of it, but I mostly remember camping at
The other place. You don't remember the...
I remember staying where the Whitney Pockets were, and I remember sleeping like on the rocks. I don't know why. I would never let my kids do that, but my mother was very...
Dad, do you remember Dad when on Easter and he would get out and bang the dish pan?
Yeah.
And he would to get the kids up to do the Easter egg hunt.
Yeah, I remember those.
Yep. But those are things I remember, is when we would camp there at the...
At the Pockets.
Right, at the cave. And then
The cave.
across
Far from the
Yeah.
the cave, yeah. That's when I started to remember going down to the ranch. And those are really special memories to me. Other than that trip I took with Dad when we were a kid. And those are my memories,
Yeah. Well, part of the reason we camped at the Pockets was for a lot of years, spring break
Right.
in school was over Easter.
Right.
And so, but then they quit doing that, and different school districts held at different times.
Right.
And so then we started camping up at the ranch in the summer.
We went up at the ranch on Mom and Dad's 60th wedding anniversary. And I got a few pictures of that. And I remember Julia and her skits.
Oh, yeah.
Julia used to do the cutest skits ever.
Oh, yeah.
And she would have costumes.
Yeah. And she had an opaque projector, where you'd slide a piece of paper and drop it down, and it had a mirror, and then it would shine it on a wall. And so my dad had built that bigger coal bin because coal prices had shot up so much. But then he ran out of money, and so it was just plywood. So my mother hung up sheets up there and then had that opaque projector of some of the pictures from the Pockets. sheets and stuff. And then she painted
Right.
those sheets so that we could go up to the ranch, I think, and hang them, and so that it looked like you were at the pockets, even though you were at the ranch or something.
Your mom and Wilma were the two talented people, and then it stopped.
Yeah.
God only had so much talent to give, and there was 10 of us. So God gave it to your mom and to Wilma.
Oh, yeah.
That's just that, and maybe a little to Dorothy, and a little to Venice, and then they did run out at Venice for sure, because although he had lots of talent for Beth to ordering you around, Beth could organize the whole world. In fact, when you die and go to heaven, Beth will have organized heaven. That's just the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
And we will say, Beth, now what are we supposed to do? And she will immediately send you on your chores.
So I still remember one thing that is we had the Easter egg hunt.
Right.
And there were two things I remember about the Easter egg hunts. I remember, the eggs were hid around.
Right, and in those little crevices on
the rocks and stuff.
Right.
But one is that one year Ray Brown brought that black powder rifle.
Right.
And, all the other son-in-laws were hunters.
Right.
Mighty Nimrods.
Right.
And my dad, of course, never hunted a Danny's life. And they had a bunch of those eggs that were left over, so they stuck them on cactuses. And then the brother-in-laws were all shooting at these eggs. Well, the black powder rifle, because when you fire it, there's a slight delay before it actually fires, right? The flash goes off, and so all of the great Nimrod hunters missed because they would fire and then they would jerk the gun because I
remember that.
And so they finally convinced my dad to shoot.
Right.
And my dad kneeled down and shot it and got it the first time.
He did, I remember that.
And all of the brother-in-laws for the next 2 days harassed him to shoot again.
I bet he didn't do it.
He didn't. He said, "Why would I shoot again? I got the, perfect record. Why would you want to mess with it?" And oh man, I think they were just mad that he had
that same trip. We had that fifth wheel at that time. And your dad was into these pit barbecues.
Oh, yeah.
And that one year, I thought it was the same year, that it didn't cook.
Right, because it was Joshua wood or something.
Right.
It was not good hot wood.
Right. Anyway, I had that fifth wheel, and I think Venice and them had their camper that year. And we had to put those roasts in. I had an oven in my fifth wheel, and you had an oven, I think, and we put that meat in those ovens to cook it. Yeah.
No.
So your mom always carried food everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we scraped enough food to feed all the people because that little group of people had ate all that chicken, so there must have not been that much chicken.
Yeah.
So
They hadn't overdone it. Once I bought that ranch, all of the toy buying stopped for me. So, why do you think the ranch is such a special place to all of us?
because to all of us, it's sacred. There's no other word to describe it. It is sacred. Why, to me, that's as sacred. I'll cry.
Do you need a tissue?
I got one.
Oh, good.
It's as sacred to me as almond diamond is to the church. Because it is, I know Marilyn says it was blessed when they were there, but it's always been blessed.
Yeah.
I remember Mama telling when they were first married and they went to the ranch and they would ride horseback down to the Colorado for a lunch, her and Dad, and how special it was. My daddy there was just special about my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And even my kids that aren't religious in the church, they think that Dad is probably the most special, wonderful man alive. You know, even Kevin told me the other day, he says, Mom, he was just a great man.
He was.
And because it meant so much to Dad, maybe that's why it means so much to us. That's all I can really say, because I know what it meant to my dad. We all knew what it meant to my dad. But us kids, we knew what a hardship that life was for Mom and Dad. And I think when they were at the ranch, it wasn't as a big a hardship as when they lived in St. Thomas.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I view it, because they were able to grow so much. And so there was abundance of food at the ranch, I kind of felt. Like they had strawberries and they had...
Yeah.
But I talked to John the other night, and he was telling me about the chicken episode, and I'd never heard that chicken episode.
Oh, you hadn't?
Have you heard it?
Which one? With the crates? Or was it?
Well, now John would have been a little boy. This wouldn't have been at the ranch, so this would have been here.
Time out. Just
All
hold
right.
that thought.
Okay.
We're going to reset.
The other day, I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't.
Anyway, I called him on his 90th birthday. And he said, we had chicken coops all over the place over there in the old house, through the block. And so Dad and Mom raised chickens, and so they decided to take them to Las Vegas to sell them. And he said on the way to Las Vegas, they tipped it over, and the chickens were kind of all over. And I don't know.
No, this was from the ranch.
Yeah, but this is John's view.
Okay.
Version. Okay. And
All right.
he said, people help him gather them up. And that's what I heard, it was from the ranch too. But then John, this is how he told it. And it couldn't have been when John lived at the ranch.
Because he was only 6 months old.
You're right. So So this is his version, okay? And you know, John tells a few stories that maybe... Well, anyway, he said this. And he said, so they went to Las Vegas and they sat on a... I like this story, so I'm going to tell it to you. They sat on a street corner and sold these chickens to passerbys. And they were live chickens and dead chickens. And he says the live chickens, Grandpa would just pull their heads off and pluck them and send them on their way. Have you ever heard this? This is John's memory, and I knew John was 6 months old when they moved here, so I know. But I'd heard about the chickens tipping over on the desert. I've heard that story.
Right.
But I've never heard this version. And I've heard that when, on the first version, that they even gathered up the dead ones, and the guy that was buying the chickens even took the dead ones. Now that's the version I heard on that. But this was a whole brand new version from John.
Oh, well, now, so Venice was talking about how Grandpa rode behind Ken on the four-wheeler and showed him where that wagon turned over.
But he said Mother was driving the pickup.
And that's why it crashed, or that's why they...
No, that was the wagon.
Well, so they didn't have a pickup when they lived at the ranch.
No.
So, see, it's kind of like the 300 story. Now, what version are we going to go by? Now, I really got a kick out of listening to John the other night tell me about his version of this chicken episode from... He said he was just a little kid, but he swears by that story. But,
well, and that might have been the Grandpa. Because, you know, Grandpa didn't have a lot of money.
We did have chicken coops over there. Yeah. I remember the chicken coops. But see, a lot of John's stories are a little bit of... And my kids love to hear his stories because they believe everything he says. And I says, well, you can believe what you want. He has the truth. And we have a truth.
Yeah.
And this is what I always say about Ray and I. She has her truth about Hurricane, and I have my truth about Hurricane. Her truth is so different than my truth that, so I don't, you know.
Oh, yeah, I know that.
Huh? Well,
that wasn't her dad, that was her grandfather.
My grandpa, Don.
Grandpa, why it's so significant to your parents and stuff?
Well, it's just significant because my grandpa Whitney was it's so amazing. Dad's brothers and sisters were not active in the church. I think one brother, his half-brother might have been, but not till they got older. And so Grandpa Whitney used to read the scriptures to my dad when they were doing and they know all of that, Don.
Okay.
They know all of that.
Okay. Well,
it's just special because it was so special to my dad.
It was. And when I'm over standing by the pond, and I don't know why the pond is this way, but when I stand over by the pond on that east side, right, where the sidewalk is, there are times I swear I could turn around and see Grandpa if I chose to. I never dared do it. But for whatever reason, standing there in the pond at about sundown is just special in a way that,
Maybe it's like the pockets. It's special, the pockets. And I know it's because Grandpa and the sleeping bag story, you know.
right?
But it's also Grandma would take Dad down and leave him, you know, as a teenager. And he'd have to milk those cows, and Grandma'd bring the separator down, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, so that was kind of a special place to Dad, and because this is special to Dad, it's special to us kids.
Yeah.
And it's special to like your kids and my kids. Maybe not so much as my grandkids, as your grandkids, but we have taken our kids down, and you've taken yours. So I mean, and so this has become really special, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it's the spirit of the Holy Ghost,
Yeah.
maybe. And don't you think that you get promptings from your parents through the Holy Ghost at times? I do from my mother.
I think I get more from my grandparents than I do my parents.
Do
I
you?
don't know why.
Well, maybe it's because Mother was here for 5 years.
Yeah.
And she would tell me little things, you know.
Yeah.
And I left home when I was so young that I never had a lot of time with my parents. So when I came down here and with Mother, that gave me what I didn't have as a child.
Yeah.
So maybe other people, I don't think other people really understand it, but that's, and Dad, he wasn't a person to show his affection
Right.
when you were a child. That's just the way it was. He had a farm to run. And when we had the dairy, I remember though seeing him up at 2:30 in the morning, sitting by the stove reading his scriptures. This is what I remember about my dad. He would be up in the night reading scriptures.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's these things, I guess. I don't know, you know.
I remember the stories that Grandpa Fenton talked about
Right.
his dad when they were hauling freight out to
Right.
the mines. And his dad was reading from the scriptures and added upon, and all these books that were there.
My dad loved to read Ben-Hur.
Oh, really?
He read that. I bet he wore the book out. And the Ten Commandments. He came to Salt Lake to General Conference, when he was in the stake presidency, and he'd stay at my house, and I lived on 6th South and 6th East. And the Ten Commandments was playing downtown. Dad went to see that movie while he was in Salt Lake. He used to stay with me on that. So, you know, and I remember do you remember when we lived in, well, you might not have, when we lived in Kearns and all of you'd come stay at our house?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah.
And your boys always tried to get me in trouble.
Well, I'll tell you, between my kids loved to go out to your house, up to your house. This was a special thing. And you built these tunnels in your
the hay.
I mean, and
Yeah.
then you'd trump, when you used to have a lot of snow and you'd trump these games.
Yeah, fox and geese.
Yep, and you'd do that, and then you'd go take the tractor and pull the
Toboggan.
hood of your car.
Or toboggans, yeah.
Yeah, and drag it all over. I mean, that was the highlight of my kids' life was, and I don't know who harassed each other more. You harassed mine or my kids harassed yours.
Yeah.
So,
Well, but I just, I know that, you know, or at least the story I've always been told is the reason Luke bought the ranch was because Julia,
her health was poor.
her health wasn't, yeah, and the water was so bad. I remember Grandpa Whitney said that it was so alkaline that
Right.
when you drank it, you were thirstier after you drank it than before. And
Not at the ranch.
no, not
No,
at the
in-
ranch,
in
in
St.
St. Thomas. And
Grandma, they used to have a lot of cabins out there on that lower. And Grandma, people come up there and stayed, like pregnant women would go up there and stay in these cabins. And Grandma cooked for them, and they'd charge them $5 a month.
oh yeah,
I mean, but she did that. It was because of her health. And Grandma Whitney had never had good health in Hurricane either. I don't ever remember her going anywhere much out of the
Yeah.
house.
and my mother said that Grandma Whitney, Grandma Julia Whitney, wore tennis shoes and cut the corners out of the toes.
She had hammer toes, and Dad had them too, and I think your mom had them, and
My mother, yeah, her
Where I
feet.
get 'em.
and I got
Her
'em.
feet were really bad, and then my grandfather on my dad's side had it, and he one day put his foot in a bucket of hot water and a chisel and put it on a chopping block and cut that toe off. And my dad said, I can see myself putting in the water and heating up the chisel and going right to there.
Oh,
But
well, they had to do things in those days like Dad did, you know.
yeah, but you know, one of the most special experiences of my life was the last year that Grandpa Whitney went out to the ranch. I had bought that brand new 1983 Buick Regal. And it was the only car that was comfortable enough for him to ride in. But it was a brand new car, and I'm out driving out through the desert, taking Grandpa. And my mother always said that was Grandpa saying goodbye to all those rocks and trees and places that meant so much to him.
He used to remember when he would take all the little kids on these little hikes. You kids were just little, and he'd have you you'd all go pick up little flowers, and then you'd go ask Grandpa to describe them, and he would describe these flowers, and he'd tell you little stories. And when we'd go out to the Indian ruins, and he'd
The
set all
writings.
you little kids down, and he would read those writings to you, pretend stories, remember.
Oh, yeah, and him talking about losing Black Beauty, the book.
Right.
And all of us out there looking for it, thinking we were going to be the one finding it. not realizing that it had been 80 years.
Right. These are things that grandparents can't do for their kids today. This is really true. We live in such a different world today that I don't think any of these little kids now would even have the patience to sit and listen. Do you think they would? They're so involved in their phones and their other stuff.
One of the things that we've done out ranch is we do have Wi-Fi out there. So that because I have to do my business and all that. But if a guest comes out, we give them just enough Wi-Fi access to get email, and we don't give them enough to do games because we don't think the kids should be out there playing games.
I don't think so either.
And now, so we will rent the faster speed Wi-Fi because that gives somebody who runs a business a chance to go out and be there with their family and still pick up cell phone calls and be on.
Well, can't you call out with your cell phone? Of course, I don't carry my cell phone anywhere I go. I have an Apple phone, and I don't carry it.
Well, no, you have to have out on the ranch.
Oh, yeah.
we have it connected to a satellite, and so, but we can do video conferences and but
I always say that to him. He's 92 and I'm 86, but I'm not old that he is.
But
they have all those pictures, Don.
So anything else that you can think of?
No, that's really it. We didn't go down there until we started, when you kids were little, we went a lot.
Right.
And I would drive the truck down, and because Larry was always working.
Yeah.
With the camper. So.
I remember.
And then after I married Don, I didn't go for a lot of years, and that's when my kids came back and started going. When you were camping around.
I remember Grandpa. He had that 30-gallon drum with toilet seat on it, and he'd go out and dig and bury it. And
it was a homemade one. Remember the homemade toilet?
He had, and he'd go kind of around the back of the rock. And,
Well, it was kind of a pretty weird-looking toilet that he built. Out of born lumber.
Yeah.
We weren't like uptown like when we bought that one.
Porta potty, you mean that they hauled down every year?
That's the first, what is it? We called it, Dennis and we called it that first.
Timeshare?
A timeshare. We said this was the only timeshare we belonged to was Jed's toilet.
And then so you'd be going down the state, and Ray would have his trailer.